So welcome to my talk, which is about GitLab, the DevOps platform. My name is Nuritzi Sanchez, and my pronouns are she, her. I am the Senior Open Source Program Manager at GitLab, and I've formerly been the chairperson and president of the GNOME Foundation, as well as helped to start a company called Endless, which creates a Linux-based desktop for people with little to no internet access. I'm thrilled to be here with you today at All Things Open. Today, during our time, we'll be covering a few different subjects. I'll start off by giving you an overview of GitLab. We'll then dive into its open core business model, and I'll wrap up with how to join in. So let's start off with an intro to GitLab, for those of you who are either new to it or just want to learn a little bit more about it. I'd like to start by sharing GitLab's mission, because it's what drives us all as we work on this project. It is GitLab's mission to make it so that everyone can contribute. We believe that when everyone can contribute, consumers become contributors, and we greatly increase the rate of innovation. And this matters because it drives our product creation, this idea that everyone should be able to contribute. GitLab is not just a place for you to host your code. It's one platform for the whole team. And we've identified many different stages necessary during your software development lifecycle that you need to go through in order to deploy really amazing, fast and secure software. So these stages are things like manage, plan, create, verify, package, secure, release, configure, and defend. That's a lot of different stages. And if you had a tool for each one of those stages, you would end up with a lot of different tools that you have to maintain, that you have to make sure integrate and work well together, that you have to make sure that people have, the right permissions, that it naturally creates silos because maybe not everyone will have access to all of the different tools, and so on. With GitLab, you can simplify your entire workflow and have a single tool that can work across all of those different stages so that it's easier to build and deploy your software faster and with more quality than ever before. GitLab also allows you to shift your security left. And if you're not sure what this means, essentially what it is that before we would create our software and make sure to run as many security tests as possible before releasing it. Sometimes you have to go back and fix things and just make sure that your software is secure. With GitLab, you can shift that security scan left, which is essentially seamlessly integrating it into the developer workflow. So you're running all these tests much sooner than you would have before, thus, again, shifting it left. And this matters because the winners in the digital economy are transforming their how they bring ideas to market, how they serve users, how they engage contributors, and how they generate value again and again. And now, more than ever, they're changing how they create and deliver software. And this is where GitLab comes in. The all-in-one DevOps platform approach allows for more visibility because everyone can see the work. It allows for more collaboration because everyone can contribute. And it allows for more velocity because everyone can deliver predictable results faster. And this is leading open source communities and companies alike to iterate faster and innovate together. And at GitLab, we're not just talking about all these benefits, but we use GitLab ourselves to deliver. And from our roadmap to the company vision, we're transparent. From the code to the culture, we are open source to the core. And we ship releases every 22nd of the month, which is a really great velocity. Okay, so now that I've talked a little bit about what GitLab is, let's talk about its open core business model. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the open core business model, let's start off by just defining that. Here, when we talk about the core, we're talking about the open source components. And you pay for additional features or add-ons that are proprietary software. To help us visualize what this means, I have an image to the right that shows the features that are in the core. The vast majority of features are in the open source core. And then there's a part of that that is proprietary software that you have to pay to unlock. So now that we've talked a little bit about like what an open core model even looks like, let's talk about how GitLab's model works in greater detail. First, the open core that I mentioned is published under an open source license called the MIT expat license. We have a buyer-based pricing model that helps us figure out where to add features and into what tier. I'll go into this in more detail in just a few slides. And then one thing that we're absolutely committed to is being a good steward to the open source project. And in my opinion, this is one of the most fundamentally important things that a company can do when they decide to go forward with an open core business model. Again, I'll go into this a little bit more in a few slides. GitLab is also dedicated to co-creation. And again, in my opinion, I think that this open core business model is just another take on the whole question around open source sustainability. Many of us wonder, how are big companies supporting open source? And in this case, this is an example where a company was built around an open source project to help make sure that it's successful. And this is where, again, we're dedicated to co-creating. So we want to invite people to build alongside us to help shape GitLab into something that's useful for all of us. And with this dedication to co-creation means that we have resources available to help people contribute. So those are things like merge request coaches to help people through their first merge request, or a page that details all of our product management teams so that you can ping people directly and have a conversation with them and work on the features that you think are important to your project. We also have transparent practices. So everything is public by default. And this means that you can see what people are working on, what their quarterly goals are, how the different programs that they're running and how those are managed, everything. And this kind of is aligned with how open source communities work, where everything tends to be public by default as well. Now, the way that the GitLab product works is that there are two distributions. There's the community edition, which is the fully open source version. It only contains the open source code. And then there's the enterprise edition. And this has the free tier, which is equivalent to the open source core, but you can also easily upgrade to the higher tiers. So it includes the proprietary code that you can pay to unlock. And when you're deciding between the two options, we strongly recommend that people use the enterprise edition because, again, they can unlock those tiers if they find it useful later down the line. Now, I mentioned this a bit earlier, the buyer-based pricing model. And again, to remind you, this is how we decide, how our product management team decides which features go into which tiers. Here's how it works. In general, the free tier is meant for a single developer. The premium tier is meant for team usage. And then the ultimate tier is really meant for strategic organizational use. So that's when you're coordinating among many different teams and really working across cross-functional teams. Whenever we have some sort of doubt or conflict in our tiering model, we always default to being a good steward of the open source project, and our stewardship promises override this buyer-based pricing model guidance. So I keep mentioning this stewardship promise. Let's talk a little bit more about that. We have 10 stewardship promises, and here I'm just going to highlight 2 of them because it'll give you an idea of what they are. Again, this helps us make sure that we're developing our proprietary features in a way that does not harm the open source project, and really that we're helping to build that open source project and making it stronger and better as we continue to develop the for-profit aspects. So the number one in that list of stewardship promises is that when a feature is open source, we will not move it into a paid tier. We might move other features between other tiers. So let's say that it's in the medium tier, we might move that to the higher tier or vice versa. But when a feature is in the open source version, we will not move it up into a paid tier. Number 6 of these stewardship promises are that the majority of new features made by GitLab Inc. will be open source. And we can see how this plays out in this next image. This image shows you the various releases that we have had and how many features get added into the open source core versus the proprietary higher tiers. And as you can see here, the overwhelming amount of new features get added to the open source core version. And I keep coming back to this, that we are committed to the open source project, and we see the GitLab community as co-creators of GitLab. And that's not only to the GitLab product, but it's also to the company and to the community. We have a handbook that, again, details all of the company practices, and we welcome merge requests even to that, or asking us about how we're developing our strategy or our roadmap and all of that.